You ever see a woman's face freeze mid-rant when she realizes she just tried to bully the wrong man? That's exactly what happened when HOA Karen tried to sue me for living outside her precious gated community. Yeah, you heard that right, outside. See, I'm Jake Miller, retired law enforcement. Spent 23 years serving this county, kicking in doors on meth labs, pulling people out of wrecks, and testifying in courtrooms that smelled like fear. When I retired, I wanted two things: a quiet piece of land and a porch where I could drink coffee with my dog, Max, watching the sunrise over the ridge. But Karen, the HOA president down the hill, decided I was violating her neighborhood aesthetic. Even though I wasn't even in her jurisdiction, she drove up my driveway unannounced, clipboard in hand, acting like she owned the entire valley. "Your fence is too high," she barked. "This gravel driveway is an eyesore, and your American flag is offensive to some residents." I just stood there, coffee in hand, letting her words bounce off me like rain on a tin roof. But when she tried to hand me a fine for living on my own land, I knew something bigger was brewing. She started a social media smear campaign, calling me unstable, telling neighbors I was dangerous because I had guns and a badge in my past. She wanted me out, so she could claim control over my land and push her HOA further up the hill. I didn't move for 2 decades to keep the peace just to get bullied by someone who thinks a clipboard makes her God. So I started documenting everything: her trespassing, her rants, her attempts to get others to call code enforcement on me. I set up cameras, collected screenshots, and quietly checked property lines. You want to know what I found? Karen's entire HOA was operating on fake property lines. Their nature trail that they loved to brag about. It was on my parcel. The decorative sign at the entrance, 2 feet onto my land. The HOA Precious Community Center driveway, cut across the corner of my boundary like it was nothing. And the best part, the HOA was sending me fines for encroachment, while they themselves were squatting on my property. I kept quiet, letting them build their case, thinking they were so smart. Karen even filed a lawsuit, claiming I was in violation of their community standards, and demanded removal of my fence. She showed up in court wearing pearls and smugness, waving her binder of violations, and threatening me with ruin. She didn't know I had something in my briefcase that would shut her down. When the judge asked if I had anything to present, I pulled out a folder containing official county surveys proving my boundaries, drone images showing the HOA encroachments, and a letter from the county planning office confirming that Karen's nature trail, sign, and community driveway were sitting on my land. You could hear the air get sucked out of the room. Karen's smirk turned into a twitch. Her lawyer's pen stopped moving. The judge raised an eyebrow. And then I pulled out one last document. My cease and desist notice to the HOA demanding immediate removal of all encroachments, or pay monthly land use fees directly to me. Karen tried to speak, but her voice cracked. She looked around the courtroom, eyes wide, realizing she wasn't the power in the room anymore. You know what it feels like to stand your ground after years of keeping quiet. Feels like freedom. But this wasn't the end. As I walked out of that courtroom, Karen's followers were waiting, glaring, whispering, filming with their phones. They didn't know what was coming next, because I was done playing defense. I was about to show them what a former cop who knows the law can do when he's backed into a corner. When I left that courtroom, Karen's eyes were burning holes in my back. She didn't say a word, but I could feel the rage rolling off her like steam from a cracked radiator. Because for the first time, she realized I wasn't just that stubborn ex-cop on the hill. I was the man who had just exposed her entire HOA for trespassing, under oath, on camera. You'd think Karen would back off after that, right? Nope. She came back swinging. A week later, I woke up to find a group of her HOA enforcers standing at the edge of my property, waving clipboards, measuring tape, and phones pointed at me. They were recording me like I was some criminal, barking about violations, non-compliance, and failure to maintain aesthetic standards. On my land, one of them, a wiry guy named Dennis with a sun visor and a trembling voice, tried to serve me another fine. I just stood there, arms crossed, letting Max, my loyal German shepherd, sit by my side, tail thumping calmly on the porch. They threatened code enforcement, county inspectors, and legal escalation. I smiled and told them to leave. That afternoon, Karen's Facebook group lit up with posts about me, calling me dangerous, hostile, even claimed I threatened her with a weapon. They edited videos, clipped my words out of context, and posted blurry photos of my fence, saying it was a hazard to the community. But here's the problem when you play games with a man who spent 23 years in law enforcement. I record everything. Audio, video, screenshots, every single interaction, and when they claimed I threatened them, I posted the full footage on a private neighborhood forum, showing me standing there, arms folded, Max wagging his tail as they spewed their nonsense. No threats, no aggression, just me, tired of the harassment. The neighborhood started to notice. Neighbors who had once quietly nodded at Karen's demands started sending me private messages. Hey Jake, I'm sorry for what they're doing. Man, we didn't know Karen was lying. I've been fined for years over nothing. Can you help? I realized Karen's power was crumbling. She was losing control, and people were ready to stand up. But they needed someone to lead the charge. I went to the county records office and pulled every file I could find on Karen's HOA. Bank statements, meeting minutes, filing inconsistencies, expired permits. Karen's HOA wasn't just trespassing. They were funneling fines into a maintenance fund that was never audited, paying contractors who were her relatives, and holding votes without proper notice to homeowners. One night, I got a message from a woman named Linda, a single mother in the HOA who'd been fined for having a child's bike visible from the road. She was nearly in tears. She told me Karen threatened her with liens if she didn't pay immediately, claiming her bicycle violation was a serious infraction. That's when I decided it was time to take the fight to Karen, not just for me, but for everyone she had bullied. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday, 7 p.m., in their community center, which, as we established in court, partially sat on my land. I could have evicted them from the property immediately, but I had a better idea. I showed up, wearing my old service boots and a calm smile. Max walked beside me, calm but alert. Karen was at the front, pearls and smugness intact, calling the meeting to order as if nothing had happened. The second she saw me, her voice faltered. "Jake, you're not allowed here," she snapped. I held up a piece of paper. "Actually, Karen, I am. You're holding this meeting on my property." She froze, the room falling silent. Neighbors turned, whispering, eyes wide. I walked to the front, placed my briefcase on a folding table, and slowly opened it. Karen tried to speak, but her words caught in her throat. Because she knew I was about to end her entire game, and I wasn't alone anymore. As the echoes of my words settled in that community room, Karen's face turned the color of her cherry lipstick. She tried to grab back control, rattling off some nonsense about trespassing and disturbing the peace, but I simply pulled out the county property map I'd printed, pointing to the bold lines showing exactly where her community center ended and where my property began. A few neighbors gasped, leaning in to see the truth. The silence was delicious. Karen's cronies, the clipboard crew who spent their weekends photographing mailboxes and fences, looked at her with confusion, shifting uncomfortably. I didn't yell, I didn't threaten, I just let the evidence speak. Then I pulled out the second stack of papers, audit records, payment receipts, canceled checks made out to Karen's relatives for landscaping, and security patrols. The same patrols that harassed Linda's kids for riding bikes too close to the street. I looked Karen in the eye and said, "I'm done watching you steal from this community." She tried to laugh it off, waving her hand dismissively, but her voice cracked. Neighbors started asking questions. "Is this true, Karen? You said those fines were for repairs. Why does your cousin get all the contracts?" Karen's composure was crumbling. She stammered, accusing me of forging documents. That's when I flipped the last page in the folder, showing the notarized county clerk stamp. Real, official, undeniable. Suddenly, a man in the back, Jim, the quiet retired mechanic who had lived under Karen's thumb for years, stood up. "Karen, is this why you fined me for my truck? To pay your family?" The room erupted. Neighbors who had been too afraid to speak finally found their voices. They asked about the constant harassment, about the fines that magically appeared when people questioned HOA rules, about the threats of liens and legal action if payments were late by a single day. Karen tried to shout them down, but her voice was drowned in the wave of anger she had created herself. She threatened to call the police. I calmly reminded her, with a hint of a smile, "You can call them, but they won't arrest me for standing on my own land." That's when she lost it. Screaming, she called me a fraud, claimed I was ruining the neighborhood, accused me of being aggressive. I stood there, arms folded, letting the neighbors watch her meltdown in real time. Then, quietly, I pulled out my phone and connected it to the small projector in the room. A video started playing. Footage from my security cameras showing Karen's son and his friends sneaking onto my land, spraying graffiti on my fence, flipping off my cameras, and laughing. The same innocent boys she claimed were being harassed by me. Gasps rippled through the room, people covered their mouths, a neighbor whispered, "Oh my God." Karen's eyes darted around, looking for someone to defend her. No one moved. I paused the video and spoke calmly. "Karen, you've lied, intimidated, and stolen from this community long enough. Tonight, it ends." A man stood up, crossing his arms. It was the HOA treasurer, looking pale. "I didn't know, Jake, I swear. She said everything was legal." Others nodded. A woman near the front started to cry softly, whispering, "She threatened to take my house." Karen's last defense was to grab her phone and call 911, screaming that I was threatening the HOA. I simply raised an eyebrow and stepped outside, letting the neighbors witness it all. Minutes later, a sheriff's deputy arrived. Karen rushed to him, yelling about trespassing and threats. The deputy glanced at me and nodded. "Evening, Jake." He turned to Karen, asking for paperwork. When she couldn't produce it, her rant turned into a panicked stutter. The deputy looked at her and said, "Ma'am, it seems you're the one in the wrong here." Karen's jaw dropped. She tried to protest, but the deputy held up his hand. "Ma'am, I suggest you calm down before you make this worse." The neighbors were watching, phones were recording, and Karen knew it. She was done. Her empire, built on fear, fines, and lies, was crumbling under the weight of the truth she could no longer deny. As I stood there, I knew this wasn't over. Karen would try something else. People like her always do. But now, the neighborhood had seen her true face, and I wasn't fighting alone anymore. The deputy's words hung in the air like thunder. "Ma'am, I suggest you calm down before you make this worse." Karen's eyes were wide, searching, desperate for control she no longer had. She tried to speak, but no words came out. A quiet breeze moved across the street, rattling the HOA plastic flags still stuck in my front yard. Neighbors shifted, phones still recording, capturing every second of her collapse. And then it hit her, the realization that she was done. No more threats, no more fines, no more control. I stood there, breathing steady, hands relaxed at my sides. I wasn't a threat. I was simply done letting her bully me, done letting her bully everyone else. The deputy cleared his throat. "Jake, I think we're good here." He glanced back at Karen. "We'll be in touch." Karen's face went pale, like she'd seen a ghost, because in that moment, she realized the real problem wasn't me, it was her. As the sheriff's vehicle pulled away, neighbors slowly turned toward me. One by one, they approached, shaking hands, nodding quietly, some with tears in their eyes. A young mom, clutching her daughter, whispered, "Thank you for standing up to her." An older man patted my shoulder. "Been needing to happen for years, son." I just nodded, taking in the moment. The fear that Karen had built in this neighborhood was gone. But this wasn't the end, because that's when the real work began. The next HOA meeting was the largest in neighborhood history. Dozens of people, once too afraid to speak, showed up. Some carried boxes of papers, fines, threats, photos of the HOA patrol stalking their homes. The room was alive with energy, anger mixing with hope. Karen tried to call the meeting to order, but the treasurer stepped forward. "Karen, you need to step down." Gasps. Karen tried to laugh. "You can't force me to step down," but the treasurer held up the HOA bylaws, trembling in his hand. "Yes, we can." It was like the air shifted. Neighbors cheered quietly, some clapped. Karen's face twisted with rage, but she had no power left. She tried to argue, to threaten lawsuits, but no one listened anymore. I stepped forward, pulling out one last envelope. It contained the evidence I had found: payments to her family, hidden in fake landscaping and security contracts. It contained the footage of her son trespassing. It contained the threats she had sent neighbors. I laid it on the table. Karen didn't even try to touch it. She just stared at it, defeated. The treasurer cleared his throat. "Karen, your time here is over." Karen's lip trembled, but she didn't say a word. She just turned and walked out, the door closing softly behind her. And just like that, the fear lifted. People smiled again. They spoke freely, making plans for block parties, kids' bike days, and real neighborhood watch programs that were about protecting people, not controlling them. In the weeks that followed, the HOA held a vote to reform its entire structure. The fines Karen had slapped on families were reversed. The liens she had threatened to file were dropped. The contracts with her relatives were canceled. I wasn't looking to lead, but they asked me to help. And so, I did. Together, we built a neighborhood that wasn't about fear, but about community. A place where kids could ride their bikes without worrying about Karen's clipboard army. A place where neighbors looked out for each other, not spied on each other. A place where no one would ever again be fined for planting flowers in the wrong color pot. One evening, as the sun set over the rooftops, I stood in my driveway, watching the kids laugh and ride bikes. Linda, the young mom, walked by with her daughter, smiling. "Thank you again, Jake." I nodded. "Anytime." Because this wasn't just about a fence or a fine or a petty HOA war. This was about standing up for yourself, for your neighbors, for what's right. So if you're dealing with a Karen in your neighborhood, if you're tired of being bullied by HOA tyrants, if you think you're alone, you're not. Because sometimes the only way to beat them is to stand up, show the truth, and let them crumble under the weight of their own lies. This was my story, but it could be yours too. If you found this story powerful, subscribe for more true HOA nightmare stories that will inspire you to stand up and protect what matters. Hit like to let YouTube know you want to see more stories like this. And if you're ready for more insane HOA takedowns and real justice stories, check out the next video on the channel now. You won't believe what happens in that one.